Hey everyone, welcome back. I have a couple things I want to show you today that will help you get started in your digital painting adventure. Last video we talked about how to use the tablet and just kind of some basics around the tool Artrage. But today we're going to look at the bread and butter of this amazing digital tool, and that is the oil brush, the palette knife, and surprisingly, the paint tube. Each one of these tools has a settings palette, I should say. And there are multiple different varieties of things that can happen. So here you can knock down paint with a palette knife. You can knock it down with a more kind of like the edge of the palette knife as opposed to the flat of the palette knife. You can smudge or blur. You can fog it away to get soft edges. And you can use this frost modifying tool to kind of make a sort of clouded version of it, right? So this is basically 5 different unique settings, and within those you can play with different things that allow for the palette knife to look different and to do different things based on whether you're blending clouds or you're blending fabric or whatever. So this is very, very cool and very, very helpful. The final thing we're going to play with today is actually the paint tube, and this is a weird tool. I mean, for like a traditional artist like myself, when I first put that mark down, I was not too eager to ever play with that tool again. But then I noticed that if I used the palette knife as default setting, that first option is the default setting, that I could use this crazy paint tube to make really interesting things happen. And that alone, maybe it's not the best tool, but in tandem with something like the palette knife, it can be a very powerful way to paint and to play. And play is what it's all about. So let's go ahead and get familiar with the way Artrage works. Now, every software has its own sort of logic, you know? And so we're going to get into the logic of Artrage through these 3 tools. Like I said, this is the bread and butter of this software. And right now we're using default settings. Let me just walk you through a couple things. I'm going to hold Shift and then drag my stylus across my tablet. That's going to change my brush size. And I'm just going to make a big blue mark. This is the default setting. It makes a big blue mark like so. If I take my pressure, push it up, that mark gets broader. If I take that pressure, push it down, the mark gets more narrow. So pressure works as a sort of starting point that interfaces with the pressure that you're putting on your tablet as you digitally draw. Thinners is interesting. If you take it down to 0, it makes the paint really thick. You can catch more of the bristle. You get more of that 3-dimensional shine of the actual oil paint as if it was literally laying on that surface. If you pick up that thinner and scrub it all the way over here, that's like painting with a lot of water or a lot of turpentine, and it turns into almost a glaze. Halfway in the middle, it starts to do a little bit of both, and so on. You can play with thinners at any of these levels to get what you want out of it. But I think thinners should actually be set up right next to depth, because if you think about what you're doing here, this is like the 3-dimensional body of the paint, and this is how fluid the paint is. And those 2 things work together so much when you're a traditional artist. So let's look at depth when it's turned all the way up. And that is just ridiculous. This looks like toothpaste, right? It's so thick. And then you can bring it down to the middle, and you can bring it down to 0. And you can see the very big difference that 3-dimensional depth slider has on the mark making. Pretty cool. Loading is it's definitely a near neighbor to these things, because you can paint with a lot of depth, but if you don't have very high loading, the paint's going to run out pretty quickly. So these 3 work really hand in hand to create some unique effects. A lot of times I'll leave my depth and my gloss. Gloss just is the amount of like sheen on the paint. So you can see this one's more matte and this one's more gloss. And this is more like maybe acrylic. This is maybe more like oil, but you know, it's not always that direct in translation. There can be some modifications there, but let's just kind of leave these here. I'm going to put this here and slide this one right there. And then that gives you a mark that looks a bit like this. Not bad. As you start to pile it on top, you'll start to get a little bit of depth buildup, but not a ton. If I put the pressure up higher, it starts to give even more of that three-dimensional mark, but it's impacted tremendously if I slide the stiffness, which gives the paint more of like a bristle quality. And in this case, I can get all kinds of different interactions when I start playing down here. I also can change the head from a square-headed brush, which literally is like a square. I've never painted with a brush like that in my life, or this kind of round. So this paint's sort of like a big full-bodied round. If you take the aspect and slide it, what that does is it changes the width versus the height, and you get something in this case that looks exactly like a filbert. Here you get something that looks exactly like a flat. This is your square-tipped brush. This is your kind of beveled, kind of end of your thumb looking brush. The rotation you can modify, so that's going to change the starting point of the tool. And like I said, the stiffness can either give you like, how should I describe it? It's sort of like how bristly the mark is. So all that said, these are all very, very cool. One more thing I want to show you, this is pretty important. If you, I'm going to go back to my default settings just for this demo. This is make it a little easier. But if you can see, if I have auto clean on, so you can see I'm blending color like this, right? If I have auto clean on, then I put a mark down, it's going to go back to the color I have selected. If I turn auto clean off, then the color I'm using is going to continue to be influenced by the color that I get with all the interactions on the canvas. And if I want to go back to this color, I have to literally go back to the color wheel and reselect it. But as soon as it gets dirty again, it's going to carry that color forward, as you can see. All right, that's a little tour of the oil brush and the different marks that it can create. I mean, look at that variety. It's awesome. Now let's look at the palette knife and just look at how well it can modify, enhance, and blend, obviously, the marks that are on the canvas. You can even use the palette knife as a painting tool. So not just a blending tool, but as a tool to actually apply paint. And this is one of my favorite things to do. When I feel like my painting is getting a little stale, I like to use the palette knife as a delivery medium for the paint. So that can be done in this mode as well, which is uses more of like an edgy mark. Then you've got the smudge tool, edge blur, and fog. So all of these different tools have different effects, and they do different things depending on the settings of the brush that you're using. They're going to interact with the marks in different ways. And then finally, this really cool and crazy, this is just wild stuff. The paint tube is literally like squeezing out chunks of paint. And forgive me, I had auto clean still on and loading on there. So what I'm going to do this time is just use that, go back to my palette knife, and then turn auto clean off. I'm just going to blend this, make a big old mess. And notice how the palette knife will knock down any of the colors that you have already. It's very, very effective at blending. So let's now look at these three tools. And I'm going to turn the gloss down just a little bit on that. And I'll leave the settings up so you can kind of see what's happening. And I'm going to go Edit, Clear Layer, and I'm just going to show you a real, this is so simple, right? Like, it's just tube out some, like you just go get high concentration yellow, orange, red, let's do purple, let's go like all the way over here, purple, and blue, and you know, we'll just put a little green down here just to keep everybody included. Get a big palette knife and just, you know, just playing with what's possible is really, really fantastic. And then you can do the same kind of stuff with the oil brush. You can put down paint and you know, you can mix the paint really naturally, and then you can mix it with the palette knife too if you want to go all in. And all of that stuff is not just for fun, but it really is skill building to do something like this. And if you want to see me develop this painting using the exact same techniques that I just showed you, click on my next video. It'll be a part 2 of this particular demonstration. And hopefully you have fun with it, and hopefully it gives you some new ideas. Thanks so much, and take care. Thanks for watching.